Last week, we looked at all four Gospels, and it's concerning the Passover meal and the institution of the Lord's Supper. Because last Sunday we also held our quarterly Lord's Supper, and so I tied them all into that. And in that, Jesus, we was learned that he rode in on a donkey, like I mentioned earlier, and they were shouting Hosanna, singing praises to him as though he was a king, and treating him like a king, waving palms and laying palms down in the street as he's riding in on the donkey. And then a week later was the Passover meal at the end of the week. Today we call it Palm Sunday because this is a week before Easter, the resurrection. And so that's how we get that, do the week. But on the night of the Passover, after the Lord's Supper, and after they had sung a hymn and everything in the upper room, says that they went out to the Mount of Olives, up to the garden, up into a garden up there, where there's a bunch of olive trees. It's where we get the name Mount of Olives from. And it is outside the city. And Jesus left some of the disciples where they first came into it, and took 3 others further up. Then he left them at a spot, and he went on up further, saying, and he told each of them to keep watch and to pray. And Jesus went off by himself and prayed. And when he was alone, we are told that he was sweating drops that looked like blood. His sweat is almost like he was sweating blood. And he came back to the first group of his inner core disciples, which was usually James, John, and Peter. And of course, after eating a meal, just like me and Mom and Dad do, I know, they fell asleep. Having a big meal, you get tired. You fall asleep. Well, instead of praying, these disciples had fallen asleep. And it angered Jesus because, they didn't really know what was going on. But yet they fell asleep instead of praying like they should have. Now, maybe they prayed for a little while, but as we know, you sit there, get still, and you start praying. I tend to drift off to sleep instead of praying. And Jesus wakes them up. He says, "Come on, can't you even keep watch with me for an hour?" He says, "Keep watch and pray." And he goes back and prays some more by himself, asking God, saying, "Take this cup away from me." And the cup he's talking about is what we're getting ready to look at. But the big important thing he said was, "However, not my will, but your will be done." Because we have free will. Jesus had free will. He could have walked away and said, "No, I'm not going to do this." But if he had done that, he wouldn't be the Savior. He wouldn't be the Messiah. And we wouldn't have the freedoms we do today. So he prayed, and not my will, but yours. And then he went back and he got back with all the other disciples. And while they were there, Judas, along with the Roman soldiers and temple guard and others, came up and Judas kissed Jesus, greeting with a holy kiss. And we all know from there they took Jesus away. And he was tried in a illegal court because it was at night. It took place in secret. The only people that knew it was going on were the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, and the soldiers and temple guard and the disciples, plus the servants of the households. The rest of the population had no clue what was going on that night. They take him to Caiaphas, the high priest, first. And then Caiaphas, not wanting to disturb the Passover, took him to Herod. And Herod didn't want anything to do with it because he interviewed Jesus, basically didn't find anything wrong. And he said, he asked him where he was from. And he said, Galilee. He said, oh, you're Galilean. Well, you need to go see Pilate. He's the one in charge of that area. So they took him to Pilate. Pilate didn't find anything wrong with him. And said, look, I'm just a little governor. I don't have the authority from Rome to kill anybody, so he sent him back to Herod. And Herod said, I find nothing wrong. I have nothing that I can charge him with that deserves death. But the high priest kept on pressing. And he said, look, I'll have him scourged or whipped, but I'm going to let him go because I have found nothing deserving of death. And they kept on pressing. They said, well, there's one tradition we have. Release one of the prisoners in exchange for Jesus. And so they released Barabbas, who was a known murderer, thief, and whatever else. And they took Jesus, had him scourged. And the Jews also got it to where Herod said, okay, he'll be crucified also. And so as we read those stories in the Gospels, it says that they took Jesus and put a crown of thorns on his head. They made a crown of thorns and put it on his head. And one thing that I've heard throughout growing up and stuff was the thorns were the result of a curse from God. All the way back in Genesis with Adam and Eve, when they first fell. And so Jesus, who was without sin, had a crown of thorns put on his head, representing a curse. Thorns were a curse. And the soldiers mocked him as they put a robe of purple on him. They beat him, trying to get him to prophesy who hit him. And they also used the cat of nine tails to whip him. And this cat of nine tails wasn't just 9 strips of leather coming out of one central point. The leather had pieces of glass, sharp rocks, bone, and anything else that could inflict pain tied into the ends of the tails. And so every time that whip came down and hit his flesh, those would dig in. And one controlling the whip would pull it back so that as they grabbed in, they would rip the flesh. And some songs soon we talk about the stripes of Jesus. And that's what it's referring to, is his flesh being ripped open for our sins. Then, after they get done with that, we're told that he's made to carry a cross. And so imagine carrying a cross. Now this is just a representation. This cross that I've got. Because that one we assume that it's made out of much bigger wood, because it had to support a grown man. This was just a representation of the cross. But carrying that through the streets. Now whether or not it was assembled like this, like I've got here, already assembled, and he drug it like I am, or he just said the cross piece, we don't know. But we were told that he carried the cross through Jerusalem and up to the hill of Golgotha, or the place of the skull. And he stumbled. But imagine having to carry something like this. You've got a crown of thorns on your head that have dug in, and if you're carrying it like I did, it's beating against your head. And it's hitting that crown of thorns, driving them in deeper all the time. And then, all of his back was ripped open. Open wounds, blood. And we know just from getting a little cut how painful it can be. So imagine trying to carry a big wooden cross with that. Now, whether or not he was already attached with his arms, we don't know. It just says they made him carry the cross. And we generally portray him as not being put on, firmly attached to the cross, affixed like he is getting ready to be crucified, until they're up on the hill and they're ready to erect the cross. Now, I've got 3 nails here. These are modern day nails, or spikes. But theirs, we've got a representation of one on the back wall, about the same length, but it's a square. It's a square cut because this is machine made. What they had back then wasn't made by machines, it was all hand hammered. As we see on some of the shows we have nowadays, they talk about something being hammered out by hand. And showing how it was done. And that's the type of equipment they had back then. But the question comes in, the main point I'm getting to is, and there's songs about it. Who drove the nails? Now we usually portray it as a Roman soldier, but he was just doing his job. Who is it that actually caused the nails to be driven into his body? And the song goes that it was me. Ouch. My sins that caused the nails to be driven. My sins. Not God's sin, not Jesus' sin, but mine. My sins are what drove the nails into Jesus' body. And, they did it in his hands. Imagine the pain going through right there. We don't know for sure if it was through his hands or in here, where the two bones of his arm meet. But it was someplace where the bones were not broken. And so, up here, there's all that's supporting is muscle and sinew and tendons. There's no bone support like you would have down here. So more than likely it was here. Because crucifixions are brutal forms of murder, of torture. Because having your arms like this, you're tired, you're beat, worn out, with all the blood draining out of your body. And it's putting so much weight, your body's putting weight on your chest, it's hard to breathe. And so you can try to pull yourself up a little bit and get a little bit of a reprieve, but because of where the nail's going through your hand, not having a good support, you can't stand it that long and you have to relax your arm again. So imagine constantly trying to pull yourself up to where you can get air in, but having to let that air go so that your arms don't hurt. And we talk about his feet too. Now I've seen pictures of where, and I've seen on TV, they have found a box, a bone box, ossuary, and there was somebody that had been crucified because it had a nail and it was going through the heel bone, going through in this area right here, which would mean that it was attached to the side of the cross. Now we don't know for sure. We do know that none of Jesus' bones were broken. So that's why we tend to have it illustrated of going through the foot up here, because that's where your tendons and stuff split out, and again, you don't have a bone support like you would if they went through the heel. And that's one reason we have it as illustrated. But down here, where his feet would have been, my sin drove the nails. My sins caused him to be placed on this cross to die for me. And then we're told that he was raised and the cross was lowered into place. And they probably just let it drop into a hole, like I just did. So imagine you're hanging on the cross, and it's raised up, and all of a sudden, boom, it hits that hole, falls down into that hole. Then they start going around it, driving in wedges to help hold it upright. And you're hanging there for hours on the cross, knowing that you're going to die. And the people are making fun of you. If you be the Son of Christ, save yourself and save us, is what they told him. if you're the Christ, if you're the King, come down off of that cross. But he didn't. Why? Why didn't he come down off the cross? It's because of his love for me. He loved me, that he was willing to become a sacrifice. He willingly went through this pain for me. As Paul said, I am the chief sinner. I am. I'm the chief of the chiefest. I'm the number one sinner. But yet, Jesus loved me so much that he died on the cross for me. Because my sins should have those nails going through my hands. My sins are the ones that should have put me on the cross. But because Jesus went to the cross as the ultimate sacrifice, freely, giving of his life's blood, as we sing, dying for us, dying for me, his death covers my sins and washes them away. And we're told that they took him down after they had checked they went through, because it's getting time for Passover and festivals and stuff, and Jewish laws didn't allow for anybody to be on a cross at those times. And so they went. The legs of the two thieves that had been crucified on either side of him, they broke. And that was to hurry up and cause them to die. Because with broken legs, they could not push themselves up to get breath. However, it says that Jesus had already died when they were doing that. So they did not break his leg. Instead, they drove a spear into his side, and water poured out. Body fluid poured out, basically. And by it, because it said it pierced his lung. And basically, through research and studies, that they have found out that he bled to death. He bled out. He gave all of his blood. And the response the body has is it builds up fluid to injuries to help try to clear them up and everything. And so basically he kind of drowned to death too, because when they pierce his side, they think that the spear went into his lung, pierced his lung. And that's where the fluid came from, was his lungs. And so he had bled to death and also drowned. And so they didn't break any of his bones in accordance with the prophecy. And once they had confirmed he was dead, then Joseph of Arimathea went to Herod and said, "Can I have his body?" And they granted him permission. And they took and put it into a brand new tomb that had never been used. It was brand new. It had just been carved out. And the Church of the Sepulchre, they've just finished restoring it, taking care of it. And they've done some major technological excavations on it, where they took machinery and cameras and we're able to film inside the walls of different areas and look at different things. And come to find out that some of the walls of the church are actually encasing rock that was there from the 1st century of the tomb, of a tomb. And so they are starting to lean more towards believing that that is the actual tomb of Jesus. There's still some doubt, but with all the advances in technology, being able to see through stuff and seeing a lot of the stuff, and since it's the normal traditional site, more than likely it is the tomb of Jesus. But he was buried there. Now next week, I'm going to stop there. Next week, we're going to look at the resurrection. And what does that mean for us? Because we know our sins, my sins, put Jesus into that grave, into that tomb. My sins caused him to suffer with nails being driven through his skin, to suffer with a whip. And the person yielding the whip wasn't just somebody they drug off the street. He was a master at using the whips and knew how to inflict the most pain with every stroke. And Jesus went through that willingly. Yeah, he had suffered and he was in pain and suffering. And he could have walked away. He could have came down off of this cross. But he didn't. His love for me kept him on this cross. He made him go through all of that pain and through all the suffering of this cross. And so next week we're going to be looking at the resurrection and what does that mean. So as we get ready to sing our invitation, if there's anybody here that wants to join our church or wants to pray about something or to make a profession of faith, rededication, I'll be here in front waiting to receive you. So as we get ready to sing,
Number 325. 325.